Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Good to talk with you. Welcome to the DMZ, everybody. It's been a crazy week. Scott Walker, and in the past 7 or 8 days, Scott Walker has suspended his presidential campaign. Pope Francis has come to town, and John Boehner has announced he would be stepping down as speaker. How did you guys?
I already knew John Boehner was going to step down because I listened to Matt Lewis on the DMZ last week where he told me the whole thing.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
He laid the whole thing out.
You heard it here first, folks. And in fairness, I said, it's not likely to happen, but it's not a crazy theory.
You said 50% chance.
No, I think you're giving me too much credit there, Bill. But
no, I checked the tape. We taped on Thursday, and I think it was Thursday, not Wednesday, but still, it was Wednesday or Thursday. And you said you heard from a friend, a source, that it's possible Boehner would step down after the papal visit. And then you went on to say you gave it a 50% chance of that happening. And,
right.
And that is by far 50% more of a chance than anybody else was saying publicly.
Well, I think
on Thursday of that week.
Well, I think I'm the only one who mentioned that this could happen or even theorized it. But I hate to make myself look bad, but Bill, I think that, at least what I've written, maybe I misspoke, which would benefit me, but I think what I'd written was it's a 50-50 chance that Boehner would be toppled, but that it was about a 15% chance that he would step down right after Pope Francis addressed the joint session of Congress. 15, not 50. Either way, you heard it here first, folks. And I'm a little I got to say I'm a little disappointed. I was contacted yesterday by a Washington Post writer, and I'm quoted in a story about how pundits got Donald Trump wrong, which I was, not the most egregious offender there, but I certainly misunderestimated his power or his staying power. Yet, where's my Washington Post profile for predicting, the John Boehner thing was a possibility at least?
Well, I want to get into the Trump thing, too, because I think that's sort of a bogus premise because he's still going to flame out. But what is the Boehner bombshell? How is conservative Washington handling this? Because on one hand, as you talked about in past shows, there was this massive revolt aiming at dislodging him from power. And so there's certainly lots of high-fiving around that, but it's coming with the realization that this is going to keep the government open, this is going to keep Planned Parenthood funded, this may well resurrect the Export-Import Bank. Now there's reports of bipartisan 2-year budget talks with the White House to try to avoid any hopes of shutdown through the next election. And this will likely elevate Congressman Kevin McCarthy to Speaker, who's arguably more liberal than Boehner is. So, what is the upshot in conservative Washington? Are they happy or sad? 4 days after this revelation.
Well, look, I think there's some people who are not happy. There will be talk radio hosts and outside groups who criticize McCarthy, meet the new boss him as the old boss. And I think it's a fair point, really no more conservative than Boehner. But he is different than Boehner. He is more likable than Boehner. He goes out of his way to bring members. He recruited many of the people in the Freedom Caucus. And he goes out of his way to kind of hold their hand and walk them through things the way that Boehner didn't. Boehner didn't take the time to, I don't know what the term is, suffer fools gladly. He basically said, I know the House better than you. I know the rules better than you. You elected me the leader. Do as I say. McCarthy is sending a signal that there'll be a change in culture, a change in tone. I suspect he will be easily elected majority leader by a huge margin. I mean, right now he's being challenged by Dan Webster, I believe. I think McCarthy will win overwhelmingly. And I actually believe that there's a chance that he could govern much more effectively with much more harmony than Boehner did as Speaker. I think that this doesn't mean that they're all going to vote with him. They won't. But I think that they'll respect him more, and they will not go out of their way to destroy him. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, but that's the sense that I'm getting having talked to some smart people the last day or two. And by the way, some of the same people who tell me things like, "Don't be surprised if John Boehner were to step down after the pontiff addresses the joint session of Congress."
But assuming Boehner is successful at reaching a 2-year budget deal, restoring Export-Import Bank, raising the debt limit, I should also mention that's also in the cards. If he takes away all of the issues that drove a wedge between him and the more right-wing House Freedom Caucus, what factor would there be in McCarthy having the same kind of friction, at least through 2016? I mean, if Boehner takes away all of the problem areas, McCarthy gets a free ride until 2017, when
right.
We don't know. I mean, presumably he would still be Speaker. A few people predict Democrats to take back the House, but even if there is, I mean, he can get really lucky in the Republican president and expanded Senate majorities, then everyone is hunky-dory. But if there's another Democratic president, you still have a filibuster contingent in the Senate. You hit the same exact problems, regardless of who's Speaker, because the underlying, I mean, the main obstacles to what the House conservatives want was not Boehner, it's President Obama and a 40-plus contingent of Democrats in the Senate. Those are the obstacles, not Boehner.
Right. Well, look, I think that if Boehner is able to clear the deck that would be a service that he would make on the way out. But I don't know that he's going to be able to do that. In fact, I'm hearing, and I think it's pretty much been accepted, that there's going to be like another CR battle in December, right? So, I mean, it's not going to be...
Well, the 2-year budget deal would prevent that if they struck that. I mean, the current CR is through December. The question is, can Boehner, McConnell, Pelosi, and Obama strike a 2-year deal before Boehner's out the door, and then you wouldn't have a shutdown problem in December?
Yeah, but I mean, is that going to? I mean, how likely is that to happen?
I mean, we can't predict here, but certainly there is incentive amongst all parties to reach that. McConnell doesn't want to have a shutdown crisis in December. He's very anti-shutdown, and if they came up with some deal that was, they're being pulled in two directions. Obama, Democrats want more spending, and McConnell wants less. But presumably they can be in the middle somewhere. Maybe you end up getting something around status quo.
Right.
Boehner would presumably be able to get the lion's share of Democrats and a faction of Republicans who are anti-shutdown, and particularly the defense hawks who want to make sure the military doesn't get put under sequester again. So you can see how that could come together. Now, that's not to say it's a glide path, but that's what they're aiming for, it seems.
My specialty isn't this sort of palace intrigue stuff, but the other thing to kind of keep an eye out now is, since I've already promoted Kevin McCarthy to Speaker, the majority leader position and the whip position. And it seems like they're going to push through a new rule that means that if you run for another leadership position, you do not retain your old seat should you lose it. So, for example, if Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's head of the Republican conference, were to run for majority leader and she didn't get it, she would also lose her current gig, leadership role. So that's an interesting move. It changes the dynamic around a little bit. And I'm hearing Steve Scalise could be in trouble. That he is I guess, a congressman from Louisiana, and apparently not terribly well liked by a lot of people in the House, and he could be in trouble. It looks like Tom Price, I guess out of Georgia, is the most likely to become majority leader. I think there's going to be some fighting for the whip position. And there's basically three things at these leadership positions that sort of matter when you look to it. One is geography, one is ideology, and one is personal relationships. And so in the case of geography, you would factor into it and say, like, okay, well, Kevin McCarthy is from California. Do we want someone like Kathy McMorris Rodgers? Well, she's from Washington State. Maybe we need to have somebody from the South. Maybe we need Price from Georgia, right? You've also got delegations potentially voting in blocks, like the Texas delegation, with the exception of Hensarling, who's already endorsed Jeb Hensarling, I guess, has endorsed Price. I think that's right.
And Paul Ryan endorsed Price. But
the rest of the Texas delegation is Pete Sessions. Am I right that he's been floating the idea of running for majority leader? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Again,
I thought he was running for a different post.
Okay, well then forget about that. But sometimes these state delegations vote in blocks. We already talked about the personal relationships, and I think that's why McCarthy is potentially different than Boehner. And I think that might be Scalise's problem, that he frankly just, from what I'm hearing, lacks those personal relationships, and isn't
because so Sessions is running for whip. The
whip, okay.
So can you explain? I mean, is there no ideological distinction between Scalise and Price for the number 2 spot, majority leader? Here you have McCarthy, who is, as you point, he's winning on the personal relationships, but he's not seen as a real conservative movement person. It seems like the folks that ousted Boehner want to have a more hard right person, at least at number 2, to kind of hover over McCarthy. Yet there seems to be a dissatisfaction with both Price and Scalise, whereas I thought both those guys are pretty hard right.
Well,
so can you?
I mean, your perception of hard right is different than Ted Cruz's perception of hard right. Number one, but I mean, I think here you want to get like really into the weeds on this stuff. It goes to something like this, right? So Scalise beat out Tom Graves for, I forget what position it was. It might have had to do with the RSC, the Republican Study Committee. But there was a time, I don't know, 3 years ago, let's say, that, and maybe it was the whip position, I don't know, but Scalise, I think it was RSC, Scalise beat out Tom Graves for a position. Tom Graves being, a more hardcore conservative, sort of Freedom Caucus or whatever guy from Georgia. And Scalise is seen as being Eric Cantor's guy. So that's why some of the hardcore conservatives don't really like or trust Scalise. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, this is like someone said recently, it's not just inside baseball, it's inside the baseball. But remember, that's what these leadership races are. I mean, it's really hard it's hard enough for pundits to game out like big elections where the public has a say. This is 430, well, however, less than 400. It's a very small number of people who are elites by definition. Making, I guess, I think it's a private vote. I think it is a secret ballot, right? So, I mean,
right.
Yeah, it's really hard to game out how these things, and it becomes personal relationships, and this person slighted that person. But long story short, I think it's possible that Scalise ends up the odd man out altogether. Like, not only, like, in other words, could potentially be completely out of a leadership position, not even retaining his post as whip in a month or two, in a month, when all this stuff shakes out.
So, considering how messy this all is, and how it doesn't really resolve some of the underlying tensions between political ideology and political reality that the Republican caucus struggles with. There's an argument that a lot of liberals like myself a couple of years ago were saying to Boehner, you got to confront these Tea Partiers. These people they're destructive to the party. They are forcing you into untenable political positions. When they were pushing shutdown in 2013, you should have said, we're not doing this. Don't make us do this. If you try to force me out because of it, I'm going to cut a deal with the Democrats and become a bipartisan speaker, and I'm going to freeze you out completely. And I'm going to end this bullying from the far right once and for all. And Boehner, of course, not only didn't take that advice 2 years ago, he went as far as to, sacrifice himself, then have to do that confrontation, which effectively saying, I think this kind of comes to, what motivates Boehner. He seems to put party before everything. Anything that was going to divide his party. He said himself, he didn't want to put his party through a leadership fight. He didn't want to have to press his allies to have to vote for him on a confidence vote and then have to face primary challenges for it back at home. So anything that would prevent an internal civil war was worth avoiding, whether it was not putting immigration reform on the floor or whether it was abandoning the speakership entirely. And I think it's worth questioning whether he did succeed in avoiding an outright civil war, but the party is still debilitated by this faction that keeps demanding strategically ridiculous positions instead of having someone take the lead and saying this has to stop.
Well, look, I think in terms of standing up to them, McConnell has done a better job at doing that than Boehner. Personally, I want the right to right itself. I want the soul searching to shake out, and I don't care whether it's because somebody stands up and puts people in line, or if it's because everyone just sort of blends together and newbies mature and old establishment types retire. This sort of process, this is a process. And so it doesn't matter to me about proving somebody right or wrong. The conservative movement, the Republican Party, has been going through this time in the wilderness, and they need to get past it. So I think, I'm going to be a little bit optimistic and say that I think it's possible that with Boehner gone now, that McCarthy, because of the force of his personality, because he's going to change the culture, because he's going to placate's the wrong word, but spend the time and energy to inform, the conservative, wing, that he may have better relations and that we may not have things like, threats of government shutdowns going forward. So it's possible this was a big moment.
But the Ted Cruz right seems allergic to any kind of, strategic considerations. Whoever seems to communicate them is immediately derided as selling out. So why would McCarthy, of all people, have the secret ingredient to now I see I can't defund Planned Parenthood while Obama was in the White House. Oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
Let's save that for next year.
Well, I think it's because Ted Cruz is going to Ted Cruz. He's going to be Ted Cruz, and he has a personal incentive to keep doing what he's been doing. But he's not in the House, and he's Mitch McConnell's problem, and he's apparently been kind of isolated based on recent news within the Senate. So now you have to worry about the House. The real problem is when you get 25 or 30 House members opposing you as Speaker, there's really only a handful of people in the House that are probably really in the Ted Cruz category. There are other people who probably see this as a second chance, a second life, right? Boehner had basically written them off. They're going to have tough re-elections. They probably weren't going to get any support from the NRCC, and they were probably going to lose elections because they were on the outs with the leadership. Now they get a second chance to redeem themselves and to get on board with McCarthy. I would not be surprised if a lot of the most vehement, hardcore conservatives vote for McCarthy for Speaker this time. So I think that really there's only a handful of the people who are entirely recalcitrant, who are not, who have not maybe either matured. Some of them I just think had a personal problem with Boehner. And so, yes, there's some people you'll never reach, you'll never change their minds. I think it's a relatively small number. And I think you might be surprised at some of the people that we thought were the Hell No caucus who actually support McCarthy.
Now, I wrote a piece for Real Clear Politics on Monday that said the impetus to dispose of Boehner, which stems from the argument that Ted Cruz articulates, that nothing has changed. We win the House, nothing changes. We win the Senate, nothing changes. That notion that something is fundamentally broken there is not just unique to this House Conservative caucus. You also have Trump out there saying that everything's broken. The immigrants keep coming in, they're breaking the law, the system doesn't work. And you have Bernie Sanders on the left saying the system's fundamentally corrupted, and we're not a democracy, we're an oligarchy. There's a theme across all of these strands that rails against the system for not working because it's not doing the thing that I want them to do immediately. And my thesis was that that doesn't mean just because you're not getting what you want right now is not the same as the system doesn't work and needs to be blown up. In the case of Boehner, it's not that he wasn't doing what conservatives wanted of him. It's that Obama and the Senate Democrats weren't going to do what they wanted of him. It doesn't mean that nothing changed when Republicans won the Congress. There's a lot of other things Obama would have liked to have done that are not getting done. He's not getting the American Jobs Act. He's not getting an expansion of universal preschool. He's certainly not spending as much money as he would have otherwise have wanted to do. The budget deficit went from nearly 10% of GDP to below 3% of GDP post sequester. I mean, that's a clear consequence of Republicans taking the House in 2010. So this notion sort of like nothing changes, nothing works from a Republican perspective is just demonstrably false. In the case of immigration, both Bush and Obama tightened border security considerably, and now the numbers of undocumented in America is down. It's down by about 1 million since 2007. You have a net rate of illegal immigration that's at zero because of the border security measures, which the Trump acolytes just refuse to listen to, refuse to believe is true. So you've evidence that the system can do the things you want it to do. Maybe not as fast as you would like, maybe not as completely as you would like, but to say that it's doing nothing and that things are getting worse is just false. And of course, on the Sanders side, if we were a total oligarchy and democracy was lost, then there wouldn't have been Obamacare, there wouldn't have been Dodd-Frank, and there wouldn't have been a Federal Recovery Act. And there's all sorts of things that Obama got done that at least suggest that the system works when you win elections. And it just maybe you didn't break up the banks, maybe you didn't eliminate Citizens United, but it's not like nothing got accomplished in the system as it's currently arranged. So there's just, I think, a widespread miscalibration of expectation and false extrapolation when you don't get what you want, meaning, well, politics is broken. No, politics is hard, and it takes a lot of work to get what you want, and it doesn't always happen in one fell swoop. So I think this is a bigger issue on the right than the left because Sanders is doing relatively well, but still is unlikely to actually get the nomination. The House is now losing a speaker and seems incapable of doing some basic governing function because of this false expectation.
There's just a couple of quick things here, Bill. Monitoring Twitter here. It looks like, I haven't quite seen what was said, but it looks like Kevin McCarthy said something about Benghazi that suggests that they're politicizing it as opposed to it being a
well, McCarthy said something yesterday where he was bragging that after the House Select Committee, once that was formed, a Benghazi committee, that Hillary's numbers dropped. And now Democrats are pointing at that, saying this proves that this is not a serious inquiry. This is just a political effort to take down Hillary.
Gotcha. The other thing I wanted to bring up, apropos of nothing, but an interesting thing to keep an eye on here. Matt Bevin, who was soundly thrashed by Mitch McConnell a couple years ago in a Republican primary in Kentucky, is running for governor, and he's running neck and neck in a very tight race. But some interesting stuff has happened. First, the RGA, the Republican Governors Association, is apparently, at least for now, pulled out and quit running ads for him. Secondly, Bevin apparently showed up at the Democratic headquarters in Kentucky to complain about, I think it was a billboard about him that he didn't like.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, he was asked today who he supports for president, and he said, reportedly said Ben Carson. The only problem with that, he's campaigning with Rand Paul later this week. Rand Paul's campaigning for him, I should say. So,
well, isn't Rand Paul 1 foot out the door at this point?
The one that did what?
Isn't Rand Paul 1 foot out the door of the presidential race at this point?
Yeah, I mean, but I think the smart answer is Rand Paul, right? I mean, if you're running in Kentucky,
that would be the safer answer.
That would be the smart answer, right? I mean, in Kentucky, if you're running for governor and you're trying to, seems like that would be the right move. I have no idea what this guy's thinking. I mean, I think there was a hope.
Well, Bevin.
I think there's a hope that he had sort of gotten his act together.
There's actually two really interesting governor's races going on. They're coming up in November, and actually Louisiana. There's Kentucky and Louisiana, and just to stay in Kentucky for a bit. Matt Bevin, who you remember from the McConnell race from last year, is up against Jack Conway, who you may remember from the 2010 race versus Rand Paul,
right?
Where Jack Conway, the state attorney general, who was considered to have a decent shot at winning that race because Rand Paul was considered fringy, and Democrats actually do relatively well statewide. There's a Democratic governor; he's already attorney general, yet they went hard on Rand Paul over this infamous Aqua Buddha incident from when it was a college prank that he was involved in, and they tried to make it into evidence that he was not a real Christian. And Rand Paul got extremely indignant and turned the tables on Conway and ended up winning, going away. Conway is now trying to, right his own ship and prove that he is a solid candidate. He's actually had some weak debate appearances. Conway's been kind of limp on the stump, but the ad campaign against Bevin has been ferocious. They are just pounding Bevin as a, quote, pathological liar, which is actually taking a quote from a McConnell aide from the 2014 campaign and throwing that in his face, and then taking every instance of flip-flopping on Bevin's part and wrapping it in the frame of pathological liar. And Bevin actually just very recently put up a 2-minute video trying to defend himself, largely by throwing more muck at Conway, and then putting people to a webpage saying, here's the truth. But a lot of the truth there are fact checks dating back to the McConnell campaign. They don't have anything in regards to the Conway campaign. So there's a sense that, it is a neck-and-neck race. I'm not saying Bevin can't win here, but there's a sense of Bevin playing a lot of defense. And I'm a little surprised the RGA is pulling out. They actually ran an ad defending him on one of the liar charges, a question whether Bevin paid his taxes on time. and the RGA would ran an ad in defense of him for that. So, and it's like the RGA has much else to do. There's only a couple of races right now, so it would be odd just to pull all together when the race is not anywhere close to being lost. But Bevin's definitely an odd candidate, and he's not coming out of the party establishment, so there's definitely tension there, I'm sure.
Well, it's weird because, like, he ran like a sort of unorthodox campaign last time and got crushed by McConnell. But then you had the sense that maybe this time around he, like, learned his lesson. He was going to be a smarter, better candidate. And, I mean, I don't follow the Kentucky gubernatorial race very closely, but just based on the last three things that I've seen, it's like he's a loose cannon. And I just wonder, like, what in the hell his deal is. Like, it's bizarre. And it seems like this was a really good opportunity for him to redeem himself and to win, to sort of make a comeback and to win. And, wow, it's looking weird. I mean, it's a close, he could still win. It's a very close race. It's not over by any means.
Yeah, and the other great race here is in Louisiana, where people thought that David Vitter was going to have a cakewalk. Being United States Senator, waltz into the governorship. That's a lateral move that a lot of folks are able to make. And obviously it's an extremely Republican state these days. But Louisiana has a so-called jungle primary where everybody, regardless of party affiliations, on the same ballot in October. And then if nobody gets 50%, then the top two move on to a runoff in November. And there are 3 Republicans running and 1 Democrat. And so what often happens is, there'll be 1 Democrat, that guy will get, around 30% or so and get into the runoff, and against 1 Republican, and then that Republican will then win going away in the general. Or the runoff, I should say. But Vitter is kind of compromised because he's of Washington. There is this prostitution scandal that kind of lingers in the background. And he's actually really bad on the stump. He is a very kind of doughy, mush mouth kind of figure. And there are 2 other Republicans in the race. One's Scott Angell, and the other is Jay Darden. Scott and they're not necessarily ahead of Vitter, but they're holding Vitter down into like the 20s in recent polls. And Angell in particular is a very strong speaker, very Cajun. He plays up his Cajun roots a lot. There's also a weird thing going on in Louisiana where Vitter and Governor Bobby Jindal hate each other, and Angell is actually closer to Jindal. So Vitter tries to use that against Angell and say he's sort of part of the problem of Baton Rouge right now, whereas Angell goes back at Vitter and says he's part of the problem of Washington. He voted to raise the debt ceiling 5 times, that sort of thing. And Vitter is calling both Angell and Darden liberals. And Angell was a former Democrat because a lot of Democrats in Louisiana were very conservative. They've switched parties now. So Angell's being called a Democrat and Darden's being called a liberal. Meanwhile, the actual Democrat, John Bel Edwards, says no one's touching him. And that one recent poll suggested that if it was Bel Edwards versus Vitter in the runoff, the Democrat would actually win because you got 2 Republicans beating up on Vitter and the scandal in the background. And Bel Edwards is, again, a relatively conservative guy for a Democrat. So it's a very complicated set of dynamics going on there. And because the presidential race is so interesting right now, there's not a lot of attention being paid to that.
Yeah, I agree. And it is funny how people we assume are going to like dominate don't always do that. All right. Anything else there, Bill?
Well, I mean, there's still plenty going on in the presidential field.
All right.
I keep waiting for. I feel Trump is certainly hitting a bit of a wall right now, although he got a bit of extra press attention with his tax plan. But both Fiorina and Carson seem to be having sort of parallel rises, which I wonder is kind of gumming them all up. No one's having a singular breakout. The way Herman Cain hit 30% and kind of owned the field for a couple weeks. They all keep kind of stepping on each other's toes and preventing each other from having the full 15 minutes to themselves. But Fiorina is milking the Planned Parenthood thing as much as possible, even though she gets repeatedly fact-checked to death over what she said was in the videos.
Yeah.
But she doesn't budge it in.
Tim Carney over at the Washington Examiner wrote a really good piece, sort of, fact-checking Fiorina's comments about abortion, and I think it's probably the best piece written about it. Basically, pointing out that where she was right and where she was wrong, and check it out, Washington Examiner, Tim Carney.
But she seems to get a certain amount of street cred by. I mean, it's the Trump no apology approach to politics. If you just say you're totally right, you get credit from the diehards who are most interested in the subject. So she's sort of owning the people who are most angry at Planned Parenthood now because she refuses to budge an inch.
Right. But she wasn't.
But she can't.
But I think it's one of those cases where, like, okay, so the Dan Rather, remember the Dan Rather story, right? About the it was sort of debunked because it was a forgery, and it just made the whole scandal go away. But maybe it shouldn't have. Like, even though Dan Rather was pushing and doubled down on and pushed a bogus and fraudulent document, doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't also look into George W. Bush's Air National Guard record. But it did. It made that whole story go away. And I think likewise, like the fact checkers who say that Carly Fiorina was wrong, that's not exactly true. There's a lot of nuance, and a lot of what she said is right, but it's not exactly the way she presented it. And so I think we sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater when they fact check.
No pun intended.
Oh, geez, what a horrible. Did I say no pun intended? I really mean, you said no pun intended.
I said no pun intended.
Okay, that's a horrible one. We sincerely do not mean a pun there, but you get my point. All right.
It's okay.
Okay.
We'll forgive.
Well, you're not going to be the one running the negative attack ads against me, Bill. I know it's not going to come from you.
I can't hear you there.
I know. I'm saying you're not the one who's going to come after me. I know that.
Your credit is strong, Matt. I wouldn't worry.
All right.
But I mean, all Fiorina would have to do is to say, no, you don't see the actual. You don't see the doctor saying we have to harvest its brain. We have a testimonial from a stem cell researcher worker, technician, telling the story about it, but we don't actually see a kicking fetus having its brain removed. She could have recalibrated the statement.
Yeah, but there are videos and pictures of a kicking fetus, but we don't know
the context of that situation, whether it was an abortion, whether it was a miscarriage, and certainly we don't see its brain being taken out.
Right. So, yeah, that's true. And so I think that it's not like she imagined it whole cloth. I mean, I would say it's within the bound. If she were writing this, it sort of goes to what Tim Carney said. Like, if she were writing this in a column, and I were the editor, I would have her rewrite it and make it more specific and accurate. But for someone speaking rhetorically, we don't know to what degree this was rehearsed. It certainly landed like a very well-rehearsed line. I mean, it was a great, powerful piece of rhetoric that helped her a lot. But if she's speaking extemporaneously, I think we need to allow for a little bit of that kind of, I don't know what the word is, artistic license or something.
Oh, if it was just the one instance in the debate speaking extemporaneously, and she then recalibrate afterwards, I would totally cut her slack on that. But she is refusing to budge a single millimeter on the point.
No, but don't you think if she budges, then it becomes easier to say the whole thing was bogus? Even Fiorina admits that she made up the story, when in fact she didn't make it up. She conflated some things. It's much more complex than a sort of reductionist theory that she lied or made up a story.
Well, that's why I think, it definitely works for her short-term benefit to consolidate the anti-Planned Parenthood vote to not apologize. It is clearly helping her break out of the pack and making her into the top tier for the time being. But I think that would be devastating in a general election. You'd be hammered in the spotlight. The way Al Gore was for saying he went with the director of FEMA to Texas, was really the deputy director. He got killed for that for a week. That kind of stuff. It gets treated differently in a general than in a very raucous primary. It's one of those things where it makes me say there's really, it's probably reason number 5 why she's not going to be the nominee. But she's not going to be the nominee because she's a weak general election candidate.
I think Fiorina could be the nominee. I'm not predicting her. I think she could be the nominee. I think she could be the Veep. And I certainly think she could be a secretary of something. I think she's really done herself a lot of good in this race and has impressed a lot of people. And I think that she's got a shot at this thing.
But she also seems to be held back because she's now, she started by being the fiercest Hillary Clinton attacker, which really seemed like an audition for VP. I can be your attack dog. You're worried about, attacking a female candidate. I'll be there and I'll do all the dirty work for you. Now she glommed on the Planned Parenthood thing. She's going for that social conservative vote, and she's getting some of it. But Ben Carson seems to get 10 to 20% of that of the Republican electorate just by standing there. I mean, the guy. I know he's got ads in Iowa, and that's why he does well in Iowa. But outside of that, there's almost no overt campaigning. There's no policy positions. He's pretty mild in the debates. He doesn't have breakout moments in the debates. But there seems to be this Zen mystical thing going on where there are certain evangelicals that just see him as like a quasi-religious figure, and he gets a certain percentage based on that. And if you're trying to get that anti-Planned Parenthood vote, Ben Carson's now in your way from truly owning that faction.
All right, Bill, are you ready to quit talking now?
If we must, we must.
All right, I plug stuff all the time. So you had a piece in, was it RCP this week?
Yeah, so the RCP
Monday, right?
piece, Real Clear Politics, Boehner, a victim of unrealistic expectations, talking about how, the system's not broken, people. Yeah. Things still work, just politics is hard. And also a piece up on ourfuture.org about the recent Jeb Bush 4% ad, which I thought was odd. I mean, the ad literally says he turned 4% into 4%, trying to be kind of cute and quirky. But it's odd because the current GDP of the second quarter of 2015 is 3.9%. We're actually not at 2%. So it struck me as a bit of a strategic misstep.
Check out my podcast. This past week, I interviewed Robert Draper of the New York Times Magazine and other outlets, and we talked about how he goes from doing travel writing to writing about politics, and just incredibly diverse writer, interesting guy, good guy. And I also interviewed Stuart Stevens, the former Mitt Romney senior aide and media guru, who has a book out called The Last Season about taking his 95-year-old father to I think they went to every, was it Ole Miss game? I think it was, a college football. Went to every game, and he wrote about that. And in the process talked about the South and going back to the 1960s, all the changes. Interesting stuff. Had a good conversation with him. Check out the Matt Lewis and the News podcast. Get it on iTunes. Subscribe, comment, give it multiple stars. And
right now, I am currently reading the final draft of Too Dumb to Fail.
Yes.
And maybe we'll have something to say about that at next week's broadcast. The book's not out till January, but I got the sneak peek. I know I shouldn't give away any spoilers, but I might be hard to contain myself.
Well, I think since you'll have just read it, it'll be fresh in your head. Maybe we do a short segment on it a little bit, talk about it, and because you're one of only a handful of people in the world who've read the whole thing. Or who will have read the whole thing. So, awesome. All right, guys. Thank you for watching us do this and supporting us. And thank you for posting comments. And tell your friends about this show. You can get it on iTunes. You can watch it. You can check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. And we'll see you guys back here next week. Thanks, Bill.
All right. Take care.
See ya.